Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Joshua with Think Liberty, and today we're joined by Arvin Vohra. Arvin is the vice chair of the Libertarian National Party and has recently announced his plans to run for United States Senate. How you doing today, Arvin?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. We're glad to have you. So let's get started a little bit about your journey to liberty and the movement and the party as a
Sure.
whole. What road you took to get there? What led you that way?
Sure. I mean, for me, it was a combination of realizing how much government interferes with individual excellence, with individual greatness, with that free ability to really define yourself, whether you start out rich or poor or middle class. And a big part for me specifically was the fact that both of my parents were civil servants and then both of them became entrepreneurs. And I saw, how much the government sort of holds down the people that it's supposed to actually be helping, as direct employees, and how much more you can get from life when you have that freedom. So for me, freedom has never been just a purely abstract concept. It's been a mechanism through which you can live a better life.
Nice. Who influenced you most politically, like throughout your journey?
The famous, political influencers, I would say Ayn Rand had a very large influence on me, just discovering this idea of sticking very strongly to principles. Ayn Rand was probably the first person that I'd heard put forward this idea that taxation is just theft. It was something that I'd kind of thought, you think about things in the back of your mind, but you don't really say it because you figure if taxation really was theft, then everyone would know it and they would stop it. And it's that weird kind of cognitive dissonance that really was lifted for me when I read The Fountainhead. So in terms of big political famous people, that's been a major influencer. In terms of people who've influenced me very personally, a lot of the leadership right now, Nick Sarwark has had a very strong influence. A lot of the other people, the state chair over here, Bob Johnson, was definitely a major guide for me when I first got involved. So there's the famous people and the local people.
Nice. So when did you realize that party politics would be a good venue for you to advance liberty?
It was really when I saw what had happened because people like me were not involved in party politics. And for me, that was during the Wall Street bailout in 2008, when I saw, to me, I was like, there's no way that something this insane is going to pass. And then I realized that because, I and other people like me had decided that politics didn't matter to us. And remember, I came from being a non-voter, not like a principled non-voter, by the way, just an indifferent non-voter. When I realized that because of the indifference, the political apathy of people like me and me specifically, that something so unjustifiably, so ludicrously horrific was being passed, I realized that I had to get involved. And to me, the way to do that was through Libertarian Party politics. And it continues to be. I think that Libertarian Party politics is the way for those who want to truly advance liberty and not just kind of play act at it.
Right. So it's no secret that recently you become more and more polarizing online. Little infamous, some might say, right?
Sure.
Do you believe that the audacious messaging has more benefits than being pragmatic? And what would be your reasoning behind being so radical with your messaging?
Sure. It's one of the stories that always influenced me as a very, very young child was the story of the three little pigs that we all know. And it's been something that's guided the way that I do business. It's guided the way that I live my personal life, which is that you want to build your engine, whether it's a business engine, whether it's a political engine, with the strongest components you possibly can. And sometimes in business, people say I take it a little too far. I don't even settle for the second best chairs in my classroom, things like that. When it comes to politics, I do think that we need to build an engine that will stand up to the immense political and social pressures. So I do believe that at some point we're going to have a libertarian president. And it's going to be up to us, whether that's the type of libertarian president that gets in there and on day one pardons all the nonviolent drug offenders and drug sellers and all the people that never used violence. On day one starts working to get rid of these regulations, firing people from all these federal departments. And day one brings the troops home as the commander in chief. shuts down the foreign military bases, withdraws from these backwards agreements like NATO. We can have that type of libertarian president. That's who I want to see. Or we can have somebody that's a libertarian in name, but when faced with the social pressure and political pressure of political reality today, caves. And I don't want to see that happen. So part of it is building that engine. Another part of it is there are many more people in America that believe the hardcore libertarian message than libertarian voters, including all pragmatic and moderate and you take all the libertarian voters together, it is a smaller group than the people who believe the hardest core libertarian message. And the reason, in my opinion, is that a lot of libertarian messaging in the past has not reached them. I've seen so many people who identify as ANCAPs that voted for Trump, that insisted that everybody else vote for Trump for all these reasons, because they said, well, at least he's bold, at least he's audacious. Maybe he's not on the right message, but he's audacious about his message. And that, to me, is the reality of modern politics. We need a message that will inspire the people who all, at the very least, who already agree with us, and also inspire the people who agree with us in the back of their heads, but haven't really come to it. And I think a strong message does that. It was a strong message that brought me in. I mean, Ayn Rand's message is as unapologetic as you can get. And that was the thing that took me, is from someone that, didn't even really believe, kind of thought taxation was that, but wasn't sure, and really had such a huge influence. And I really think that the way for us to have that type of influence is with a strong, bold, radical, audacious message.
Nice. Do you find that there's a time to be pragmatic? And if so, what are some of those instances where maybe we should be more pragmatic than audacious?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to me, there's a big difference between public communication and private communication. And so when I'm doing private communications, as I'm talking to one specific person and trying to encourage that person to explore the ideas of liberty, I am the extreme opposite of my online personality. I barely say anything. I mostly just ask questions. I try to understand where that person's coming from. And it's a very different thing. I mean, public messaging and private messaging are two different things entirely. The way you want to speak when you're on CNN and the way you want to speak when you're talking, to your best friend grandmother, they're just different ways. So I think there are definitely times where a very soft and very polite message is the right way to go, in my opinion, anyway.
Nice. So one of your probably most argued about messages recently has been the soldier thing, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So do you think all soldiers are murderers, or that they are immoral? Or was that blown out of proportion?
It's an interesting question. I mean, when you say, are all soldiers murderers? I mean, not all soldiers even shoot at all, right? So you have combat troops, you have support troops. And so the thing that I think really got people bent out of shape wasn't the murderers thing. It was the accessories to murder, because the first thing, most people say, well, yeah, if you're part of a war that is in its nature immoral, then maybe you're not like a first degree murderer, but it's you're not doing something good. It's not heroic. Maybe you can call it manslaughter or 10th degree murder or something. But there's something wrong with that. That is a thing that we cannot encourage. And so I think the accessories to murder thing was probably a much more explosive commentary. And since then I've gotten the chance to know a lot of people who've worked in many different parts of the military. And to me, if you are not in combat, you're not in combat support, and you're, just protecting shipping lanes or something, I would say that that's probably a little bit more hard line. And so my current view of the military is that there are things the military does that should be done by the private sector, but there are still things that at least somebody should do, and protecting shipping lanes would be an example. Then there are things that the military does that no one should do, and that's getting involved in foreign civil wars. I don't think that that the private sector shouldn't do that, the public sector shouldn't do that, no one should do that. And so in that sense, I would say that at this point, the military is doing some things that should be privatized and some things that no one should do. Within that, I also do strongly believe that as a party of personal responsibility, we do need to hold ourselves and we do need to hold other people who represent us accountable for what they do. As a simple example, if no one ever signed up to work at the DEA, there would be no DEA. And we have gotten that kind of political pressure to work on infamous groups in the past. In the past, there were millions of people in the KKK. Today, according to them, according to their own inflated numbers, there's maybe 5,000. And I believe that we can do the same, partially with social pressure within the government itself. Right now, the government has millions of people working for it. I think through encouragement, through positive pressure, through negative pressure, through whatever method, we can start to reduce that number. And I think that a major part of what we need to do is to encourage people to find other paths, to say working for the government might be a necessity. It might be a necessary evil in the short run, but it is not noble, it is not righteous, it is not honest, it is not good. It could be a necessary evil that you do in desperation, but the idea that working for the federal government is some sort of a respectable profession has got to be removed from our culture. And I do believe that part of the way to do that is through party politics. Oh, hold on. Right now, I can't hear you for a second.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, perfect. That was my fault. So let's talk foreign intervention a little bit. And do you think there's ever a time that the military needs to involve themselves in any kind of foreign intervention whatsoever? I mean, is there a time that you could see fit as a politician where you would okay something like that?
Yes. If the United States was under direct threat from an invading army or an invading military, as in a state military, 2 or 3 terrorists is not a state military. If that was the case, then the correct response would certainly be a military response. However, the last several military actions have not been in that category or even vaguely close. So to me, it's time to start massively pulling back. The first step is to shut down all foreign military bases. Now, this is something that many experts in the military also agree with, because they say because of our fleet of aircraft carriers, we don't really need military bases anymore. We can get anywhere that we might need to go, even by the militarist perspective, let alone the pacifist perspective, using aircraft carriers. So I think that's the first step that I think we can get broad agreement on. I think we need to get out of NATO entirely. Right now, NATO is basically making America spend many times what we would to create a military, many times of what we could possibly need for self-defense. And what we're doing with that is essentially allowing Europe to become socialist because they don't have to pay for their own defense. And it's kind of forcing America to become socialist because we have to pay for everybody's defense. Right. And so shutting down military bases and leaving NATO, to me, are the first steps that we should do just immediately.
Nice. So you obviously still see the Libertarian Party as a viable conduit for the liberty movement, and specifically the advancement of individual liberties.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yes, I think there's no question about that. The Libertarian Party is often the way that people first get introduced to the message. We have the ability to reach farther than any other liberty organization, even ones that have a lot more money. And here's why. When we run a candidate, that candidate is going on all the voter questionnaires, the questionnaires that get sent to all the voters, like the League of Women's questionnaires. They're going to get that information into these small towns, small newspapers, big newspapers, and it's a message that's going to penetrate far more than any other liberty organization. Other organizations are great. I'm not saying anything bad about them. I think they've done amazing work over the last decades. But the fact is, for somebody to even learn about them, they first have to have our ideas get in front of them somehow. Right now, if somebody wants to learn about Cato, almost everybody who learns about Cato learns about the Libertarian Party first. And it's because we're able to use elections to market liberty, and we're the only organization that can do that.
Right. So how do you feel currently with how many people are kind of calling for your removal from your chair position? And I think there's been several petitions started to that likeness. How does that make you feel, knowing that there are libertarians within the movement who don't agree with your message?
Well, I don't expect all libertarians or even most libertarians to agree with me on anything. So I'm not terribly offended by that or anything like that. But I will say this, that there after the hubbub had died down a bit, I posted on our LNC discussion, I requested a new resolution that, while I said, and I even signed the resolution that affirmed that we do welcome members of the military, both active and former. But I posted something that said, given that right now, in the American news media, they are not discussing me, they are discussing leaving NATO. That was what they were discussing that week, and so many different things, that we should put forth a resolution that talks about leaving NATO, shutting down the military bases, and bringing the troops home. Interestingly, I couldn't even bring that to a vote in the LNC. Interestingly, none of the state parties that had opposed my commentary were willing to pass a similar resolution. And what that says to me is we have a big problem, that maybe some of my actions have allowed us to see that problem. That problem is this, that belief and worship of the military is alive and well right now in many parts of the libertarian movement. And I think that's dangerous. I think non-interventionism is one of our most important planks, without any question. I think it matters even more than ending the war on drugs, which I also support doing, obviously. So the fact that so many people were not willing, while ending NATO, while leaving NATO, was in the news media, to pass resolutions or make statements about that, which is a much more focus on the media than anything I've ever said, is testament that we do have a problem. And I do think that focusing on the issue of demilitarization is an important thing that we need to be doing in the coming months and years.
Right, absolutely, and I agree. I've always agreed with your message behind some of the messaging, even if we've butted heads on the actual presentation sometimes.
Sure.
Recently, another big thing that people have really taken fight with has been the calling for recruiting Antifa and also the alt-right to the Libertarian Movement. I'm sure a lot of people would like clarification on exactly what you meant by that. Sure. Did you mean recruiting those who are willing to adhere to the philosophies such as the NAP and property rights, or did you just mean to bring them in unfiltered?
That's a good question. So when you look at an organization, I think it's important to separate the individuals in that organization from the officially stated mission of the organization, because they're often different. They're often different in bad ways. For example, if you look at the Libertarian Party platform, it is phenomenal. But there are many people that call themselves libertarians that disagree with all the important parts of the libertarian platform. In other words, they disagree with getting government out of education, getting government out of healthcare, ending the war on drugs, all these big things. And they only agree on a couple minor things like, soda taxes or something like that. And so when I'm talking about doing outreach, to whether it's to the alt-right, whether it's to Antifa, it is not to endorse their political views as they currently stand, because their political views they currently stand are insane. They're not good views at all. However, just as we recognize that somebody who was, for lack of a better word, tricked into being part of an immoral war can then come to the Libertarian Party and tap into that heroism that was their original motivation, right? I mean, most people that join the military, that the idea of defending the Constitution, the idea of defending right, the idea of defending liberty is a big part of that often. And we realize that even though that desire was manipulated and corrupted, that desire is still there, and it can be brought back to a rightful path. That desire to be heroic can be made into something good. With the alt-right and with Antifa, we have people that have a deep desire to overthrow the establishment. And that's a good desire. The establishment that we have in America is rife with crony capitalism. It's rife with statist abuse. It's rife with all kinds of problems. And overthrowing it is the right answer. We don't need to reform the DEA. We need to overthrow it. We don't need to just audit the Fed. We need to get rid of it. And that comes from an emotion. Then that emotion is an anti-authoritarian, unapologetic, anti-establishment emotion. It's not an emotion found in everybody, but it is found in some people. And a lot of those people right now have had that desire, that anti-establishment desire, twisted, used wrongly. Whether it's through Antifa or through the alt-right, their desire has been misused. But it doesn't mean that the underlying desire is bad. The underlying desire to overthrow the establishment is good, just like the desire to protect the Constitution is good. And I do believe that doing outreach to the individuals who have that desire is a smart idea. I do not believe that endorsing their current politics makes any sense, because current politics is very diametrically at odds with the politics, at least that I understand to be the politics of liberty.
Right, and that's what I was going to ask you next. There's you got quite a few fans who also call themselves libertarian socialists or mutualists per se, and these are the kind of people that are kind of rallying around some of your messages recently, at least as far as I've seen online, and I think it's really important to outreach to these people too. But like I said, these are people who don't believe in the property rights or the NAP as we explain it. So what would be your plan to try and outreach to those people, and what would you say to them to bring them to liberty and adhere to the principles that we stand for?
Sure. So let's talk. I mean, the alt-left is usually more problematic for most people because, as you mentioned, their belief in private property rights is that you should be allowed to have personal property, but not private property. And private property would be like a factory, and personal property would be like your pants. And I understand why they believe that, because they believe that eliminating property rights is the best means to overthrow the establishment. However, I do think that if we put a better means to overthrow the establishment, and the libertarian message has many better means to overthrow the establishment. If the libertarian view, for example, of no bailouts had been held, a lot of the establishment would have overthrown itself. We wouldn't have to do anything. They would be gone right now. So I do think that there are people in there whose goal is to overthrow the establishment. They've been told that the way to do that is by getting rid of property rights. That's wrong. That's not the right way to do it. That's not an effective way to do it. But I do believe that the people who have that desire will be willing, not all of them, but some of them will be willing to listen to a better way to overthrow the establishment. And there are many libertarian ways that would so quickly and thoroughly and irrevocably demolish that establishment that I think that we have something to offer those groups. Not to say that everyone's going to come, that everyone's going to change, then that we're going to get this 100% conversion. We're probably not, but we're going to get some people. And we're going to get some people who are passionate and willing to really oppose the establishment and really do whatever it takes to fight that kind of authority.
Nice. So you recently stated that you're going to be running for United States Senate. And what state was that in again?
That's going to be in Maryland.
Maryland, perfect. And when was it that you decided to run for Senate?
Well, I decided a while ago. I decided that I wanted to announce it on Independence Day because that historically is the day during which the colonists decided that they were going to, depending how you look at it, either secede or overthrow the existing government in the colonies. Either interpretation has that same message that says they will not tolerate being controlled by people who do not have the right to control them. And so I chose that day to announce it, even though I made the decision weeks ago.
Nice. And so let's talk a little bit about the platform that you're going to run on. Obviously, you're going to be audacious. We know that. We've come to expect nothing less of you, I'm sure. But what are some of your platform politics? I mean, what platform are you going to run on?
So a big part of what I'm going to be talking about is eliminating very, very large kind of sacred cow government programs. And I'm not going to do it in the traditional way that politics is done. The traditional way that you do politics is you find out the people who want to end the war on drugs and you give them a half message that says, listen, let's just legalize marijuana because that's enough for them and it's not going to antagonize anybody too badly. And it's only going to antagonize very, kind of extreme anti-drug war, extreme pro-drug war people who won't vote for you anyway. To me, that type of messaging is not doing what a more brazen message will do. And the difference is this: when you say, let's fire the DEA, let's defund it, let's fire everybody who works there, let's let all the people who are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, whether it's using or buying or selling or trafficking or transporting drugs, let them out because they didn't hurt anybody, including people who've been sentenced, like Ross Ulbricht, who was sentenced under the Kingpin law. Let's also pardon people like that who, again, not done any violence. And that's a very strong message that's going to lead to predictable opposition. At least that's my hope. When you create that opposition, you then create a debate. You know, they always say that they never let libertarians into the debates. You know, being in DC, let me tell you this, there is no one debate. There are debates everywhere all the time. And the Democrats and Republicans can keep us out of one debate. They can't keep us out of the thousands and millions of debates that are happening all the time. And the way to do that, to get into those debates, is to create a message that cannot be ignored, to create a message that intentionally triggers opposition. So I will be putting forth the usual libertarian ideas, but in a way that is not designed to hide and just reach the people who like it, but actually designed to intentionally provoke that opposition. And part of doing that, I do hope I'll help people know that if they themselves speak out against, for example, government schools, they're going to have at least one person backing them up. And I really hope that I'm going to be able to help some people find that courage again, to find the courage to speak what they know is true.
Nice. You've talked a little bit about ending Social Security and selling off government assets to end Social Security. What government assets would you choose to sell off first, before you really got into the meat of it? I mean, what would be the immediate sell-off?
So that's a good question. So the idea of selling government assets to kind of cover Social Security and then shut it down is something that was put forth, as far as I know, the first time by Harry Browne. And my particular slight different spin on it is that I think that we should pay back the money, pay back to each person exactly what they paid in, and then shut the program down. And again, the funding for that would come from selling off government assets. Right now, the government owns lands and buildings, computers. I mean, there's the list of what they have is enormous. I'm not too terribly picky on which of those are sold first. I don't want to have the first thing be something that creates some kind of an immediate and obvious danger. But aside from that, it doesn't really matter to me what's sold off first, whether it's a government building. A lot of the departments are in very nice buildings that could fetch a very high price because of their size and location, or some land that's not being used for anything. Whatever it is, I'm kind of fine with it.
Nice. So do you think your radical views and your audacious messaging tactics are going to affect the platform that you're running on? Do you think that it's going to help you attract tons of voters and supporters, or do you think that maybe you'll run off some supporters and also gain some other supporters?
Well, when it comes down to the question of what's going to get the most votes, the whole world knows how to do that. I mean, if you want to get the most votes, you run as a Democrat or Republican. That's the way to do it. There's no tightly guarded secret there. My primary goal is to engage and fight this cultural war that we need to fight. And when I say cultural war, I mean the question of, is working for the government, is it respectable, or something that you only do in times of desperation? Are government schools, as American as apple pie, or are they part of the state's propaganda machine? We should get rid of them. Is being part of a war right now, is being part of the violence in the Middle East, is it heroic or unheroic? And in those discussions, in facing and challenging some of these sacred views, it's going to make some people angry. It's going to make some people happy. I'm hoping that it makes some people so angry that they go and tell their best friend that how angry they are, or they tell their grandmother how angry they are, not realizing that their best friend or grandma happens to have the same political views, just didn't feel comfortable saying it around that particular person.
Nice. Well, Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on. That was all the questions I had for you. Do you want to let people know about any websites or events you got coming up, speakings?
Sure. To just keep track of what's going on with the campaign, you can go to votevohra.com. You'll see all the information you need over there.
Rad. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this. Again, my name is Joshua. Make sure you check us out at thinkliberty.co or think-liberty.com. And also check out the YouTube at Think Liberty TV. Thanks again, guys, and thank you, Arvin, for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Still here, buddy. I got to end the broadcast. There we go.